As you sip your morning coffee and scroll through your news feed, a geopolitical earthquake is already underway. But it's not the kind of crisis you'll hear about on CNN or in White House press briefings. There are no missiles, no tanks, and no dramatic satellite images. Just one quiet policy decision out of Beijing, and the entire backbone of American technology could be brought to its knees. China has done something devastating without firing a single shot. They've restricted exports of gallium, a rare, obscure metal that quietly powers everything from fighter jets to smartphone solar panels to missile guidance systems. And here's the problem. China controls 98% of it. This isn't some niche resource for nerdy engineers. This is the linchpin of the digital age. And right now, Washington is in a silent panic. Not because this crisis is hypothetical, but because it's already happening. Gallium is not mined directly. It's a byproduct of aluminum refining, an industry that China has also come to dominate. That means Beijing doesn't just control the production, they control the very existence of gallium in the global market. So, why haven't you heard about it? Because this isn't just a tech story, it's a war story. A new kind of Cold War, one not fought with ideology or weapons but with minerals. The worst part, and America saw this coming. Reports warned about critical mineral vulnerabilities. Experts shouted from the rooftops. And still, the U.S. tech empire remained blindly dependent on its greatest rival. This video isn't about panic, it's about preparation. Because gallium is only the beginning. While the United States was celebrating its dominance in software, social media, and chip architecture, China was digging literally. For over 2 decades, Beijing has pursued a relentless strategy to control the physical resources that fuel the digital age. This is not about ideology or market forces. It's about raw power rooted in raw materials. The gallium crisis didn't appear overnight. It was engineered. While Western governments deindustrialized and outsourced in pursuit of profits, China invested in the forgotten parts of the tech stack mines, refineries, smelters, and logistics chains. The country now controls 98% of gallium exports not by accident but by design. Gallium isn't mined directly. It's extracted as a byproduct of bauxite used in aluminum refining. China, which also dominates aluminum production, quietly built the infrastructure to corner this niche market. State subsidies, long-term contracts, and export controls completed the playbook. Beijing didn't just build supply, it built the ability to weaponize that supply. Meanwhile, in Washington, experts raised red flags for years. A 2021 White House report identified gallium as a critical mineral risk, citing it 14 times. Think tanks warned of economic losses exceeding $60 billion in a disruption scenario. But policymakers didn't listen. The assumption that free markets would self-correct, they didn't. This wasn't a failure of intelligence, it was a failure of imagination. American lawmakers failed to grasp that the next global power struggle wouldn't be fought in boardrooms or battlefields, but in supply chains and soil. And while they debated social media regulations, China quietly signed mineral contracts across Africa, Latin America, and Central Asia. The result? A global tech infrastructure with a single point of failure, and China holds the switch. America isn't just at risk of losing access to gallium. It's at risk of losing the future it assumed it had already secured. When the United States blacklisted Huawei and cut off access to advanced chips, many assumed the company was finished. But instead of collapsing, Huawei pivoted. Fast. And its weapon of choice, gallium nitride. Gallium nitride, or GaN, is a compound made from gallium. It enables high-efficiency, high-frequency semiconductors ideal for 5G radar and power conversion. Unlike traditional silicon, GaN components generate less heat, require fewer cooling systems, and enable smaller, faster devices. Huawei doubled down on GaN. By leveraging China's monopoly on gallium, it began producing 5G base stations that were not only more efficient, but also significantly cheaper to deploy, especially in countries with weak infrastructure. In some cases, Huawei systems reduced installation costs by 30 to 40%. Behind the scenes, even the Pentagon couldn't ignore the results. Despite public calls to ban Huawei equipment, multiple defense contractors reportedly filed for waivers. Why? Because American alternatives were either unavailable, underperforming, or too expensive. Huawei also ramped up its patent war. Today it holds more than 2,000 patents related to gallium technologies. This isn't just technical leadership, it's geopolitical leverage. It allows Huawei to dictate terms, force licensing deals, and shape industry standards from a position of dominance. Meanwhile, Western competitors like Ericsson and Nokia struggle. Without reliable access to gallium, their supply chains falter, their R&D lags, and their products, once seen as safe bets for governments wary of Chinese influence, are now falling behind on both performance and price. Across Africa, Southeast Asia, and even parts of Eastern Europe, countries are choosing Huawei not because of ideology, but because of economics. Gallium has made Huawei too good to ignore and too difficult to replace. What was once America's attempt to cripple a rival has become China's greatest counterstrike. The U.S. response to the gallium crisis has been reactive, fragmented, and painfully slow. While lawmakers debate tax incentives and domestic production targets, China continues to control the present and shape the future. Rebuilding a gallium supply chain in America is not a matter of flipping a switch. It requires years of permitting billions in investment-trained labor environmental approvals and the political will to push through local resistance. Even then, viable reserves are scarce. The U.S. simply doesn't have enough economically extractable gallium on its own soil. Some point to recycling or urban mining as a solution. But the math doesn't work. Gallium exists in trace amounts in electronics. Extracting meaningful quantities requires massive infrastructure, and even then output is negligible compared to demand. Germany and Japan are exploring domestic refining. Australia and Canada may help diversify supply, but nothing will change in the next 2 to 3 years, and Beijing knows it. This isn't just about gallium. It's a preview of broader strategic vulnerability. The U.S. outsourced its industrial base and now lacks the capacity to pivot quickly. Even ambitious legislation like the CHIPS Act can't undo 30 years of neglect overnight. The result, America is trapped between intention and capability, aware of the danger, but unable to act fast enough. In geopolitical terms, that's the most dangerous position to be in, because while you're preparing for war, your opponent is already dictating the terms of peace. The battle for gallium is not about gadgets or broadband speeds. It's about the foundations of modern civilization. Whoever controls the elements controls the outcome. In the 20th century, global power was defined by oil and steel. Today, it's defined by lithium, cobalt, rare earths, and gallium. These aren't just components, they're geopolitical levers. China understands this. That's why it spent decades signing 25-year mineral contracts, building smelters in Africa, and buying influence in Latin America. These deals are about more than minerals. They're about locking the West out of the next economic paradigm. Meanwhile, the U.S. remains in denial. Policy papers talk about friendshoring and resilience, but actual production remains minimal. Innovation is worshipped, but infrastructure is neglected. The result is a gap between what America dreams and what it can deliver. This isn't a warning, it's a wake-up call. The age of soft power is being replaced by hard assets, and America doesn't own them anymore. The consequences are profound. Defense systems, green energy transitions, AI development all risk delay or failure if supply chains remain in enemy hands. Without material sovereignty, Technological sovereignty is a mirage. This isn't a trade war, it's a civilizational reset. One where control over atoms, not algorithms, decides who shapes the future. Gallium is just one mineral, but it's the canary in the coal mine. The story of gallium is the story of a superpower caught off guard, outplanned, outsupplied, and outstrategized. It reveals the fatal flaw in America's global position, the assumption that soft power branding and innovation could replace the hard work of building, mining, and refining. China bet on atoms. America bet on apps. And now that bet is collapsing. So what's next? The good news is that awareness is finally rising. The Pentagon is stockpiling. Allies are coordinating. Tech companies are investing in recycling. But time is not on our side. Every delay strengthens Beijing's position, and in geopolitics, leverage compounds. The truth is, America can recover, but not without sacrifice. Not without prioritizing industrial policy over quarterly profits. Not without getting its hands dirty in the ground it once dismissed. The clock is ticking, because gallium isn't just a metal, it's a metaphor. For control, for planning, for power. The country that controls the materials controls the machines. And the country that controls the machines controls the future. That's why this story matters. That's why it's not just about China or gallium. It's about who wins the next chapter of civilization. Share this video. Ask your leaders hard questions. Because if you don't control the dirt, someone else will control your destiny. The story of gallium teaches a lesson that is both profound and unsettling. Control over raw materials is now the cornerstone of global power. In an era dominated by technology and innovation, it's easy to forget that every digital leap still depends on physical atoms. Gallium, a metal so obscure that most people have never heard of it, quietly fuels some of the most critical components of modern life, from 5G networks and advanced semiconductors to military defense systems and renewable energy infrastructure. China's near-total dominance of gallium production reveals the consequences of underestimating the material foundation of innovation. For decades, the United States focused on developing software and intellectual property. It became a world leader in artificial intelligence, chip design, and platform innovation. However, while Washington celebrated app downloads and IPO valuations, Beijing was building mines, refineries, and mineral contracts. The lesson is simple: ideas are powerful, but without resources they cannot manifest into reality. Innovation must be grounded in infrastructure, and sovereignty in the modern era requires sovereignty over supply chains. Another key lesson lies in strategic foresight. China's dominance over gallium did not happen overnight. It was the result of decades-long planning, state subsidies, and long-term resource diplomacy. The West, meanwhile, trusted in market forces and globalization, assuming that supply would always meet demand, and that critical materials could be sourced when needed. This miscalculation has left even the most advanced economies exposed to a single point of failure. Gallium also reveals the vulnerability of high-tech economies. From the Department of Defense to Silicon Valley, the systems that power American military and commercial strength depend on a supply chain outside of their control. When that chain breaks or is strategically interrupted, it leads to cascading failures. Semiconductor production slows. Renewable energy projects stall. National security is compromised. In the 21st century, a tiny mineral from a single country can determine whether a superpower rises or falls. The situation also forces a reassessment of what true resilience means. It's not just about having the most patents or the highest R&D budget. Resilience means being able to produce what you need when you need it without depending on rivals. That requires domestic capacity, allied partnerships, and the political will to invest in boring but essential sectors: mining, refining, logistics, and recycling. From gallium, we learned that geopolitics is shifting from narratives to materials. control over elements like gallium, lithium, cobalt, and rare earths has become the new form of hard power. Unlike oil and gas, which powered the 20th century, these new resources are embedded in the devices, weapons, and infrastructure of the digital age. Whoever controls them controls access to the future. This is not a theory, it is already happening in real time. There is also a human lesson here. The consequences of supply chain collapse are not just abstract risks. They affect workers in manufacturing, engineers in defense, consumers, buying devices, and entire industries that rely on affordable, scalable technology. When the supply of gallium is choked, it's not just a diplomatic problem. It becomes a business problem, a national security issue, and a socioeconomic threat. Most importantly, gallium shows us that national strategy cannot be reactive. The U.S. and its allies must become proactive in securing their technological futures. That means investing not just in innovation, but in the capacity to support that innovation with resources. It means treating supply chains as strategic infrastructure, not just logistical conveniences. It means understanding that planning and patience, not just speed and slogans, win geopolitical contests. Finally, gallium is a mirror. It reflects the choices the West has made and the vulnerabilities those choices have created. It also offers a chance for renewal. If nations can learn from this wake-up call, they may still rebuild resilient supply networks, strengthen strategic autonomy, and avoid future crises. But if they ignore it, the cost will not be measured in dollars alone. It will be measured in lost time, lost competitiveness, and lost influence in shaping the future world order. In summary, the gallium crisis teaches that technological supremacy is no longer just a matter of code or capital. It is a matter of critical materials, strategic patience, and industrial readiness. The countries that grasp this early and act will shape the next century. Those that don't may find themselves powerful in theory, but powerless in practice. The story of gallium teaches a lesson that is both profound and unsettling. Control over raw materials is now the cornerstone of global power. In an era dominated by technology and innovation, it's easy to forget that every digital leap still depends on physical atoms. Gallium, a metal so obscure that most people have never heard of it, quietly fuels some of the most critical components of modern life, from 5G networks and advanced semiconductors to military defense systems and renewable energy infrastructure. China's near-total dominance of gallium production reveals the consequences of underestimating the material foundation of innovation. For decades, the United States focused on developing software and intellectual property. It became a world leader in artificial intelligence, chip design, and platform innovation. However, while Washington celebrated app downloads and IPO valuations, Beijing was building mines, refineries, and mineral contracts. The lesson is simple: ideas are powerful, but without resources they cannot manifest into reality. Innovation must be grounded in infrastructure, and sovereignty in the modern era requires sovereignty over supply chains. Another key lesson lies in strategic foresight. China's dominance over gallium did not happen overnight. It was the result of decades-long planning, state subsidies, and long-term resource diplomacy. The West, meanwhile, trusted in market forces and globalization, assuming that supply would always meet demand and that critical materials could be sourced when needed.